Welcome, everyone. We are glad to be back for this segment featuring celebrity author Wes Moore. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Robinhood, one of the largest anti poverty forces in the nation. He's a best selling author, combat veteran, and social entrepreneur. Wes's first book, The Other Wes Moore, a perennial New York Times bestseller, captured the nation's attention on the fine line between success and failure in our communities and in ourselves. That story has been optioned by executive producer Oprah Winfrey and HBO to be made into a movie. He is also the author of the best selling book, The Work Discovering Wes Moore, His Way Home, and the recently released 5 Days, which we will touch on today. Selfishly, I introduce Wes as not only my dear friend, but also my brother. I want you all to know that he's an amazing dad, husband, role model, and leader. His new book, 5 Days, exemplifies the leadership that Wes brings to Baltimore, New York, and the country as a whole. Wes, thank you so much for joining us.
Brother Tommy, it's always good to hang out with you, and not only I say not only are you a dear friend, and truly my brother. I mean, this brother is the godfather of my children. There isn't anyone who I both either look up to more or admire more than you. And so the fact that we can have this conversation about a topic that is not just important but imperative, and to do it with you, it's an absolute joy for me. So it's great to see you, and it's great to be with all y'all today.
So, listen, before we jump in, I know we're supposed to be talking about you, but I need to break some news that's so important and on topic to what we're talking about. So, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can go see the full announcement. But Truist just announced a groundbreaking $40 million initial donation to help launch innovative nonprofit funds supporting ethnically, racially diverse, and women-owned small businesses. Cornerstone Community Capital will support selected CDFIs by purchasing loan participations. 100% of the funding will be dedicated to racially and ethnically diverse small business owners, and with a huge focus on African American small businesses. Wes, that is right in line with what you focus on.
Right.
I knew you would want to hear that, so I wanted to start with that.
Well, let me tell you, I am so excited about this. And first, congratulations, well done. Because I know that this type of focus and being able to be deliberate and to be intentional about both the work that we're doing and the language we're using. Right. So when we're talking about this idea of truly investing in communities, we're talking about wealth creation. We're talking about wages. We're talking about equity. We're talking about non-equity assets. We're talking about how do we maximize wealth creation drivers, because we know that for so long we had wealth destruction that took place within our communities. We saw the fact that it was a very deliberate process in the way that this wealth gap has been created. And so not just kudos to you, but I hope it's something that others pay attention to as well, because we have got to be deliberate about this idea of increasing liquidity, of increasing capital, of increasing support for our entrepreneurs, increasing the support for our social entrepreneurs, increasing support for educational assets that actually create pathways, not just to be employees, but to be employers. And so this is a very, very, very big deal. So congratulations, man. This is outstanding work.
Well, thank you for that. And Wes, many people may not know this about you, but you're a social entrepreneur. You have tech in your blood, and and we'll get to your new book. But I want to start by giving you the opportunity to share a little bit about your story around identifying gaps around education, and the challenge that has faced Black America. I always say, and I've told you that I think there are three, key challenges facing us, and one of them is this economic injustice. You got the education disparity, and then you've got the social injustice. You started a business that took on these issues, so share a little bit about your experience.
It was. I mean, and really, we started this concept of Bridge EDU, which was the eventual name, really because we saw a fundamental gap and a fundamental challenge when it came to generally people who were first in family or first generation, oftentimes students of color who were entering into higher education, and found that even if you could increase the amount of people who were starting, the number of people who were completing was just heartbreakingly low. And so as you start really drilling into it, and again, first starting on the basis of if you look at what the data continues to show us, the data continue to show us that if a person has a college degree, on average, they will have lifetime earnings of around $1 million higher than those who do not. Right. So you see how this actually does create a quantitative impact on lifetime earnings. So if you look at the reasons that so many people were having challenges, it really broke down into three fundamental reasons. One was financial challenge. It's not just the cost of college, but it was the difference between tuition and cost of attendance because there's a difference. Tuition is just making sure that the college is good. Cost of attendance are things like books, transportation, childcare, all the other facets that oftentimes make it difficult for a person to stay. The second component is the academic preparation, where we just had students who were finishing high school but still were not ready for college or career work. And so you'd have students who would come into college and have to take on a whole battery of developmental coursework. The challenge with that is that it costs the same as taking English 101 or taking geometry 101. It's just not worth anything. So you have students who are paying a full tuition and at the end of the year having 3 credits or 6 credits to their name. That student, chances are, will never finish because if nothing else, their financial aid will run out. And the third reason is things like just life getting in the way. A family member gets sick, a family member gets pregnant. You have to go and you have to work. Something else happens that just gets in the way of your progression, and then you have to make other decisions. And so, really, what we did with Bridget EU, it was a hybrid, high tech, and high touch model of being able to provide not just support for students as they reinvent the freshman year, because we really saw how the freshman year was really that choke point for many students. If they can get past the freshman year and past the sophomore year, their chances of completion actually jump significantly. But then it's also how do you do things like the measurements, the touch points, so we know when a student is starting to fall off that we can very quickly intervene in order to make sure we can address the issues that are making them fall off in the first place. And so we built out this platform. It was actually back in 2019, early 2019. It was acquired by a education platform called Equity, which is a Brooklyn-based education provider. And so it was a really important experience for me, just kind of seeing how liquidity works. Frankly, how challenging it was in order to get initial seeds of capital that came into the business that were able to help grow the business and do that type of thing. And we just got a real education of these disparities that exist that we now see. That I mean, the stats continue to show that less than 2% of all VC capital actually go towards Black entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs of color, period. And then Black entrepreneurs, it's even less, right? And so when we think about that as a frame, it really became something where I was like, the ability for us to be able to increase liquidity to Black platforms, Black hands, Black families, that has to be something that we had to have as a core part of our work going forward.
So your experience building Bridge EDU was definitely a learning lesson, successful, but a lot of hard work in it. So folks on this call and some of the students at our various HBCUs, many of them will go on and start their business. And what the research shows is that 68% of Black business owners say access to capital is their number one challenge. You dealt with that. Talk a little bit about that process. Of course, the business plan part of it, but how you were able to translate that to get the capital that you needed.
It is a massive challenge because oftentimes access to capital is just simply about things like networks.
Yeah.
I mean, I have seen businesses that people were getting access to a ridiculous amount of capital, and they did not have a baked out business plan. They did not have a baked out thesis, but they knew how to get access to capital that was going to buy them time. in order to do so. The challenge of what happens when you do not have that type of when you do not have that kind of access to capital is twofold. One, if you have this failure to launch issue, right? Because it takes capital in order to be able to build up a platform and to build up your thesis. It takes time. It takes you being able to go out and go hire a person who can go help out with X, Y, or Z. It takes time for you to go out and hire someone or to bring someone on board who can help you make the networks and make the connections in order to get the customers. The second piece, though, it means that the chances when something does go wrong, it can become catastrophic to your business or to your organization. That you don't have that same level of flexibility if one aspect or element doesn't go right. You don't have that same concept of pivot. Because if you don't have everything that works right when you're running on such a tight cash cycle, it becomes very difficult when one small thing can go wrong. And so, how we can think about things like the access to capital, the providing the supports on the models, the how do we work and consider partnerships? These are all things that become very important, and they become very important because, frankly, for a lot of the businesses that we are seeing started now, for a lot of the businesses that get the capital and get the runway in order to grow, these are people who either a have long-term measures of success, in terms of family lineage and it's generational, and or B, they have the ability to go out and fail a little bit and know that they're just going to be they are going to be just fine. Where oftentimes folks in our community, we do not have that same bandwidth. We do not have that same extension flexibility when it comes to not getting it absolutely right on the first time, which no business does. And so that's where we are making sure that we have core assets and core capital infusions that can then hit businesses and hit our entrepreneurs the right space. That's why it matters.
So let's talk about your role at Robinhood. And Robinhood in itself is a spectacular organization. So talk about what you do there, but also how you use technology to attain, measure, and kind of track your progress.
Yeah. So it's I feel like I want to answer it both ways because A, the role of technology, and B, the role of supporting Black social entrepreneurs. When I think about the role of technology, we actually have a technology platform. It's a tech incubator that sits in Brooklyn, and it's called Blue Ridge Labs. And it actually Robinhood brought it under our ecosystem about 5 years ago. And really, the whole idea is it's a place where you combine computer engineers with community organizers. And it's a really smart model because the way you really focus on it is saying that the people who can help to not just understand what the challenges are, but also the people who can help to come up with the solutions, they need to be in the same room at the same time working on the same challenges. And so people who have a lot of technology experience, people who have community in the field, they really are working together to develop these answers. We also have a component to it called the Design Insight Group. And really what the Design Insight Group is, it's a fancy way of saying it's 1,100 New Yorkers who are living in poverty or living economically insecure. And they essentially work with all of these teams and they serve as the UI and the UX for this stuff. I mean, they are paid, they are full members of our team. And there are also people who are, it's the same way where, the amount of hands that Apple had touch this iPhone before it went out is staggering, right? And it's because they needed to make sure that by the time that it got on the shelf, they had everything worked out. They had a product I was ready to buy. Well, we don't think that the work that we do in the social entrepreneurship space should be any different. You need a significant amount of UI and UX before anything goes out. And so I think about products, for example, that have been created like Just Fixed, where Just Fix is a platform where if a person is living in public housing and a purpose is saying, okay, we have rodents or our heat has been out for months, you can make an individual singular complaint. You can even file a suit against the landlord or in your housing complex. And oftentimes these landlords, they have lawyers and they will be completely prepared. And your chances of success in that, and either A, getting it taken care of or having any type of any type of retribution is going to be very, very small. But what Just Fix does, it actually allows people who particularly are in the same housing unit to almost be able to create a consortium. Because oftentimes, if you are having challenges with heat in your unit, I'm having challenges with heat in my unit, and so it allows people to kind of come with an aggregated support mechanism as they're going to try to get these adjustments made. Or another platform that was built called Good Call, which is if a person is picked up by the police, the chances of them having a lawyer that they can call is less than 2%. That's going to be your first call. If your first call, though, is not to a lawyer or to a family member who can put you in touch to a lawyer, your chances of conviction have just risen by 60%, regardless of what the arrest is. And oftentimes, and that's when we get into this challenge of things like, people not being able to make bail or people taking pleas because they want to get home. And so Good Call does two things. It's a singular phone call that you make on it. So it's a telephonic technology. A singular phone call you make that does two things. One, it puts you in touch with your family and it notifies your family where you are. The second thing it does, it puts you in touch with a public defender. The reason why that is important is now you have a lawyer. By law, once you have a lawyer, the questioning must stop. And now they have to talk through your lawyer. And so you see how what this is, it's basically using technology as a basic way of being able to reinforce the Sixth Amendment that each and every one has the right to. But for people in poverty, they don't oftentimes get that same access. And I'll say, the one last component is how we're thinking about it in terms of supporting Black entrepreneurs. Is it's not just in the VC and the private capital world that we have a significant distinction between how much money goes out to Black founders and Black executive directors and Black CEOs. In the world of philanthropy, only 10% of philanthropic dollars go to organizations led by people of color. 10%. Despite the fact that I know, like, for example, in our catchment area, 80% of the population living in poverty in our catchment area are people of color. So not only do we fund fewer, we fund less. And so we actually created this platform called the Power Fund, where Robinhood has put in $10 million of our own capital. And in addition to that, we've now raised over six from outside sources. And it's exclusively around supporting leaders of color. It's exclusively around making sure they're getting not just the capital support that they need, but also it's the professional development, it's the management assistance, it's the technological assistance, all these various measures that can help them to grow, not just their organizations, but help them to grow in their own personal leadership statures in a time and in a way that our society needs it most.
Yeah, but I think what you just went over is so important, and it's using technology to create the social change that we need and to tackle the social injustice. And so I want to pivot and use the remaining minutes to talk just about that. We all understand the social climate we live in, and you have written a book that is timely, and it tackles the issue of social injustice. Kind of give the group an overview of your book, 5 days, and the process you took, because I think what really makes your book unique is the approach you took, the angle at which you came at it.
Yeah. I wrote 5 days, and it's all around the death of Freddie Gray, the murder that took place with Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and when he made eye contact with police. And an hour after he made eye contact with police and was arrested, he was in a coma with 3 broken vertebrae and a crushed larynx. And he stayed in a coma for a week and never made it out of the coma. And it led to these weeks of protests that took place in Baltimore until one night, at the night of his funeral, when the protests were no longer peaceful. And what we then ended up seeing and what ended up happening with that was I wanted to be able to really dig into not just what happened with Freddie in terms of his death, killing of him, what happened with the police and the interaction with law enforcement, because I think there have been a lot of stories written about that. The thing I really wanted to drill into, and I did it in where I wanted to walk through this moment through the eyes of 8 people, 8 Baltimoreans, all from different perspectives, all from different walks of life and different strata within the society. And to say that we have to understand that the policing system was one of many systems that failed Freddie Gray. That in his first 25 years of life, we actually need to think about and mourn the life that he had, in addition to the death that finally, the killing that finally took him, that led him to his death, led him to his homecoming. You know, the fact that this was a young man who was born into deep poverty, born to a mom who never made it to high school and could not read or write, who lived in deep poverty her entire life. He was born underweight. He was born premature. He was born exposed to heroin because his mother battled addiction for much of her life. When they finally moved out of the hospital after he gained enough weight, they moved into a housing project that in 2009, that and 480 other homes were cited in a lawsuit, in a civil lawsuit, because the endemic levels of lead inside of that house that they were all being exposed to by the water they were drinking. You know, this is the type of thing where when we think about the tragedies that are taking place within our society, um, we have to be able to address policing disparities. We have to be able to address policing transparency and accountability. We also have to be able to address the fact that for many of our children who are coming up in our communities, that's not the only system that needs reform. That whether we are talking about our health systems, our education systems, our environmental support, environmental health systems, our transportation systems, our housing systems, each and every one of them need to be under examination about why we have so many children, why we have so many families who repeatedly and very intentionally end up left out of these conversations and left behind by the conclusion of the conversations. And so that's really the thing I wanted to drill down in on 5 days is use this weaving narrative, use this 5-day period in the city of Baltimore as a way of helping people to understand just what exactly it is that we're talking about here and why it's so important to act.
So thank you for that overview of the book. And for those that haven't read the book, I encourage you to check it out. There's a part of the book that really gets to the heart of this conversation we're having today around HBCUs and the role they play. And so at Truist, we're rolling out this comprehensive intentional engagement strategy with HBCUs. And I'm personally looking at the outside effectiveness of gap scholarships. And you talked a little bit about that with your previous technology and education business, Bridge EDU. So in your book, you one of the characters, Greg, right? It talks about how he lost his chance at getting a degree from an HBCU when he couldn't pay the $2,958 tuition bill. Talk about why the Truist HBCU strategy or gap scholarships, why that matters so much, and the importance of HBCUs to Black America.
It's funny because I think for a lot of people, they don't know how big of a problem, how big of a challenge this is. That when people talk about the cost of college, oftentimes the cost of college goes down to, well, yes, college tuition. Yes, college tuition is a problem and it needs to be addressed. But also, let's be clear, the things that are also forcing students not to complete is not just tuition costs. It's both the cost of attendance stuff, and it is that gap financing. It's the fact that you can have a student who could be a semester away, a year away of completing. And if you owe a bill to that university, and oftentimes when we're talking about gap financing, we're talking about students who will leave school because of $800, because of $1,100. Like those are the averages we're talking about. And when people say that just doesn't seem like a lot, here's the reality. In this country, prior to COVID-19, over 40% of our population could not afford a $400 shot with cash, right? I mean, that's the reality. And so for a person who might come up with a $1,100 bill, and people say that doesn't feel like it's that much to help them, to keep them from finishing school, it is when you don't have it. And then what other option then do you have? And so the ability to be able to target that last dollar financing, the ability to be able to say, and well, if we know a university is going to hold up your credit transfer because you owe $700 to that institution, how can we then make sure that that does not become a hindrance for that student to be able to complete? And so the first thing is it becomes really important for people to understand just how big of a problem it is, how many students actually suffer from this issue of this last dollar financing. And that's why the work that Truist is doing, the work that, the work that how you all are thinking about this becomes crucially important, because just as imperative as it is to have conversations about tuition and all that kind of stuff, uh, if we aren't fixing this issue of last dollar financing and why we have so many students who are walking around this country with some college, oftentimes what that means is they started school, they have some credits under their belt, and then life got in the way, or they end up with a situation where we owe some money and we cannot go back until that money gets paid off, and that changes the entire trajectory. This has to be a core focus area we've got to think
Was so well stated. Wes, on behalf of the Bipartisan Congressional Caucus on HBCUs and Truist Financial, want to thank you so much for joining us today. I want to give you the opportunity to share a closing thought on your behalf, perhaps to any of these HBCU students that are listening and looking up to you. What would you say to them?
Well, I would first just say how important you are to our society and how important your institutions are. Don't ever forget the importance of HBCUs, and not just helping to drive and develop some of the most important leaders that we have within our society, but also helping to drive some most important conversations. HBCUs were created for a reason. HBCUs, frankly, are still around for a reason. And the reason and the necessity for HBCUs is just as important now as they always have been. And so for all the students, my thoughts, my answer to you would be keep on pushing, because our society needs you, not just your genius, but it needs your voice. And also, as you continue to push, make sure that part of that push is making sure that we are protecting and serving our HBCUs going forward.
Wes Moore for president. Thank you again for joining us. That was absolutely spectacular. We're privileged to have you. Team, listen, please join us back. We're going to take a 10-minute break. You don't want to miss this next segment. It'll be featuring the competitive edge as we look at diversity and inclusion and technology. We'll have Molly Ford from the Global Equality Program at Salesforce, the world's largest CRM provider. And we'll have Tracy Daniels, the Chief Data Officer at Truist Financial. Look back to seeing you in 10 minutes. Thank you again.
Thanks, John.